Pinky and the Brain Christmas Special comic. We see Pinky watching a TV show in front of Brain about a giant robot mouse getting begged to save people. So it makes perfect sense that he would like it. And someone advertises a toy based on that robot. Pinky wants one, and Brain has no reason to think that Santa wouldn't distribute that type of toy in general. He finds out that a person can say something lame followed by a special command, and the toy would obey the person's wish. That's not something any toy would be programmed to do, obviously. Brain plans to use a helmet and a modified programming chip. He wants to implant the chip into every Rattra toy, say a ridiculous sentence with the helmet on, and make all of the toys become willing to work for him. So he somehow convinces himself that an army of tiny toys would have any chance against real armies and military technology. If they were modified to shoot lasers and he had enough of them, then he'd have a point in thinking this would work. He goes to a toy store and sees shelves with a ridiculous amount of the toy all at once. So it looks like the demand for this toy is insanely low and people made too many of them. Immediately, a bunch of people run over to the shelves and take away all of the toys. If the demand is as high as this makes it look, the toys must have just been put on the shelves. Brain has to deal with the same thing at every store he visits. What insanely bad luck. You'd think he'd get to stores without the toys if they sell out that fast. There'd be such a small window of time where this would happen. So he decides to visit the place where the toys are being made. He smartly decides to go to an office and look at the toy store's delivery records. I guess he's small enough to crawl under doors then, because how could he reach the doorknob? Let alone turn such a huge thing compared to him. Somehow the toy's manufacturer is literally called Santa Corp Inc. and is at the North Pole. So it's insisting on going with the overused cliche of Christmas stories where it portrays Santa's real. Why would Brain think Santa isn't real if this is something that happens, which would make it clear to everyone that he is real? I assume that most people think Santa's village would have such harsh, cold weather that it wouldn't be worth it to go see it as a tourist, or anything. Well, there's actually a magical bubble around the place to make it warmer than the area around it. That has to be why Pinky and the Brain aren't freezing to death from being there. I wish I knew how they got here so fast. But I can assume Brain uses technology to do it. Maybe he could have also used technology in him and Pinky to make them stay warm in cold weather. It's nice of Brain to admit that he owes Pinky an apology, and it's good that he won't insist that he's still right after being proven wrong. Pinky thinks Santa will give them presents because he doesn't want to believe his best friend's a bad guy from sheer attachment to him, even though he probably causes more harm than good. Brain wants to go into the main facility. For no reason, the Christmas elves are not only the size of lab mice, but also assume that Pinky and the Brain are kids, even though Brain has an adult voice. So that's really annoying. Not to mention, how would kids get here? They get thrown away and fall in the snow. We should have seen them get picked up and thrown. Pinky wonders why they don't just get hired as elves. Logically, you'd think they'd never get hired because they're clearly mice, and Christmas elves are a race of people by themselves and are the only ones allowed to get those jobs. Which I assume because only they seem to have them. It was still a predictable route for the plot to take though, based on their small heights and rule of funny. So I expected that to happen right away. And it is sort of justified because the sign says that they want to hire for the big Christmas rush. So they're desperate. Brain expresses a lot of appreciation for Pinky's idea in a way that's not like him, and Pinky's open to what he said because he takes him too literally. Somehow, after I assume they beat up elves to steal their outfits, they get told by an elf that he'll take them to the audition room. Because apparently they're so desperate for workers that they'll hire people they assumed were children. They're told to memorize a happy elf dance. That'd be embarrassing. It makes no sense that this would be a requirement. Since when are Christmas elves associated with dancing and singing? If they're really desperate for workers, they wouldn't do this just to make sure that only the people who really want the job would get it. It's only happening to be funny. And it is silly to see Brain pretend to act cheerful while doing this, but it's mostly just hard for me to watch. Then they're told that they have minutes to make a toy for the carpentry test. It's surprisingly smart of them to make the applicants do this to make sure they know how to make toys first, instead of just taking them at their word. In this way they get some free labor. Somehow Brain thinks that his toy is going to be appreciated by kids when it only works after someone solved equations. It's too bad we don't see him get told that his toy wouldn't be appreciated, and then get told that he still proved he could make a toy if he could make that. Because that has to be why they're even letting him go to the third test. Why is Pinky allowed to go to the third test if he said he didn't know how to make toys? I guess it turns out he can, it's a natural, and they really wanted to give him a fighting chance first. He seems to have just a pink square in front of him. I guess that was considered a toy block, and that was good enough for them. Their final test is to ride a reindeer, which is small enough for that to be possible because of magic, I guess. The reindeer shakes Brain a lot before running really fast, and they have to hold on for dear life. It's too bad for them they don't have seatbelts. Pinky's lucky he can find that fun. He's so optimistic. Somehow they both get the job despite Brain being motion sick from the ride. Brain thanks the guy, and wonders if he qualifies for medical insurance. That's a good question. Why are the Animaniacs making a cameo behind them? The next morning, Pinky says he's got lots of wooden blocks to make, so there really is a good explanation for why he was hired. They hear someone say he's got the latest reports. Someone tells Santa that they won't give them the license for the other dwarves they want to make toys of. And Santa wishes he didn't have to wrangle with companies for toy rights, and says that modern kids want toys of their favorite TV characters. The retro robots are the most popular item this year, with thousands ready, so it stands to reason that there'd be a section devoted to them in the workshop. It's sweet of Pinky to appreciate what he's seeing in Christmas specials where people hug a lot. Brain gets hit by a toy car that's moving automatically for some reason, and somehow they see toys based on themselves. But the toys don't have the impact the artist wanted because the colorist was too rushed or lazy to do the coloring properly. So it's all in blue. And there's a guy based on Albert Einstein but really short who throws them into a hole for processing while thinking of them as reject toys because of their costumes. He seems to hate his job. He must assume that they're robots and that's why they're walking around. So they go through a bunch of over-the-top slapstick on the conveyor belt that they have no reason to survive. They must be pretty magical. I guess Brain roboticized their brains and made their bodies able to heal back to normal really quickly, so that they could withstand any attack. I wish that was explained. It makes sense for Brain to do that and make this less confusing. They get put in toy costumes and packaged. After chewing their way free off screen, Brain finds some machines that he wants to alter. Pinky says whatever you say, and that alone wouldn't justify him being called ignorant. So he's just insulting him for his earlier stupid dialogue. Brain makes tons of chips, and Pinky installs them into the robots, which I assume Brain told him how to do. So we see Brain in front of an army of robots, and he tells the robots to obey him, but forgets what phrase it is that activates them. Pinky might have had a better chance of remembering the phrase. I guess since Brain's arrogant, it makes sense that he'd assume he wouldn't forget the phrase, so he didn't write it down. And the phrase is so silly and arbitrary that it is forgettable. There's a toy robot meant for Pinky, even though he's Brain's assistant. I guess it's to reward him for all of the times that his incompetence ruined Pinky's plans. Which aren't as common as you'd think, but even one time would be enough to make him have a lot more good karma than bad. He tells Pinky to tell him the programming phrase. Brain forgot that you have to say the phrase before giving the special command. You'd think the robots wouldn't obey him because of that, and so nothing would happen if the command was said anyways. And Pinky puts on the helmet without being told to, when Brain doesn't want that. It makes sense that he thought that was acceptable because he assumed he was saving Brain the trouble of having to repeat after him. For no apparent reason, just because Pinky put on the helmet after Brain said stuff with it on, the robots get heads shaped like Pinky, acting like him because they think Pinky is their master. Apparently the commercial lied, because the robots would obey your command if you said the phrase afterwards instead of before. How could they be programmed like that? That'd be more complicated. How did the writer forget which order you're supposed to say the command and orders in? Santa gets warned that something went wrong with the assembly machines and says to abort this batch, and the robots all get sent into trap door. So wait, how did people know that something went wrong with the robots without seeing them in person? Cameras? Why didn't anyone stop Brain and Pinky before this even happened then? The story ends with Brain entirely blaming Pinky's unpredictable nature for its failure when it's also his fault. At least he didn't punish him right away for it, because he's so attached to him that sometimes he's not in a bad enough mood to hit him. This issue by David Cody Wells and Bobby Wells is about Brain wanting to take control of some toy robots that are conveniently able to follow whatever order they're given, somehow, when that'd be forbidden even if it was possible because it's too easy to use them for the wrong reasons. Brain finds out from the toy factory's records that they were literally made by Santa, so he goes there, with the story being too lazy to tell us exactly why or how anyone can stay alive outside in the North Pole for as long as they do. It must be magic. The same reason there's a reindeer the size of a mouse or elves, which are desperate enough to hire Pinky and the Brain to work for them because of the Christmas rush. They tried going to the workshop without being employed there and got thrown out. And they'd freeze if they tried to stay outside until night. So they had to get a job there, and we got to see some variety where they were made miserable. Since when would Christmas elves have to do that? So the story didn't entirely make sense. There was variety in the tests they were doing, but that's the only good thing I can say about it because it was completely contrived every step of the way. Eventually the plan fails because Brain didn't remember the phrase he had to say to get the robots to work for him and was confident enough to assume he would and wouldn't need to write it down, even though he doesn't respect that silly sentence. And for some reason when Pinky puts the helmet on and says the phrase, the robots get Pinky-shaped heads, but it does make a little sense that they'd become like him. Of course, it's good that the story isn't the exact same plot from the Christmas episode, and while it was cliche to have Santa in his workshop, it did have some efforts because the writer thought up what they'd go through to get access to the robots. But the story would have made more sense if they didn't have to go through any of that and just snuck in at night, because they could have easily arrived at the North Pole at night. And it would have made more sense if the robots didn't do anything at all because Brain forgot the activation phrase and he said it afterwards, not before his orders. You would think it would be common sense that you would need to say an activation phrase before your order.